The factory hums with the monotonous sound of machines running, the scent of grease and oil heavy in the air. In the dim light, Cao Yi wipes his hands on his faded work apron, his brow furrowed in concentration. The factory is a place of harsh reality, where dreams are crushed under the weight of duty and survival. To most of the workers here it's just another day, another shift to endure. But for Cao Yi it's much more. He looks around the floor, catching sight of He-jin, the owner of the factory, pacing back and forth like a king surveying his domain. He-jin's crisp suit contrasts sharply with the worn-down factory workers, a constant reminder to Cao Yi of the vast gap in their fates. To He-jin, Cao Yi is nothing but an errand boy, someone to be overlooked and manipulated. Yet, despite the disdain and disregard, Cao Yi knows that He-jin is the reason he's here. His father's ties to the He family had once provided Cao Yi with some comfort, but as the years passed, it became evident that He-jin would never see him as anything but a tool. Cao Yi tries to focus on his work, carefully moving the heavy metal parts into position on the assembly line. The clang of metal against metal rings in his ears, but it does nothing to block the thoughts racing through his mind. How did I get here? Why is He-jin so indifferent? Will I ever escape this place? The factory may have given him a paycheck, but it had also stolen his sense of purpose. His father's influence had once promised him opportunities to rise, to be something greater than the lowly worker he had become. But his father's death had robbed him of that. All the connections he had once hoped to leverage had turned into empty promises, and He-jin, with his cold, calculating eyes, had left him to fend for himself in the factory's brutal world. If I could just get out of here? The thought lingers in Cao Yi's mind. He pushes the thought aside, focusing on the task in front of him. But the desire to escape doesn't fade. It grows, building inside him like a pressure he can't release. For too long, he's been a pawn in the He family's game. A pawn that's slowly starting to understand the rules of the game, and how to manipulate them for his own benefit. As Cao Yi finishes his shift, the factory's cold steel walls feel even more oppressive. He-jin's words echo in his head, "You're just a worker. Never forget your place." They had stung when He-jin had said them, but they didn't break him. Instead, they fueled something inside Cao Yi, a burning resolve to prove everyone wrong. He would rise. And when he did, He-jin would regret ever looking down on him. He steps out of the factory gates, feeling the rush of fresh air against his face. For the first time in years, the thought of something more, something bigger, feels possible. But how? He still doesn't have the answer. But something inside him tells him to keep moving forward, to keep fighting. As he walks down the road towards his small, run-down apartment, the city lights flicker ahead of him, offering the smallest sliver of hope. One thing is certain, Cao Yi isn't staying at the bottom forever. Not if he can help it. Cao Yi's routine has shifted, but not in the way he expected. For years, he had toiled in the factory, his work unnoticed and undervalued, as if he were just another cog in a machine. But now, with each passing day, the factory felt less like a prison and more like a stepping stone. After his long hours at the factory, Cao Yi would retreat to his cramped apartment, where he'd spend hours scouring the internet for opportunities. He read business articles, learned about the stock market, and analyzed investment trends. The realization had hit him like a ton of bricks. If he wanted to escape, he would need money. And the fastest way to acquire money wasn't by relying on his measly factory salary, it was by taking risks, by becoming someone who could control his own fate. Cao Yi wasn't the type to gamble, but he understood that risk was a necessary part of success. One night, he stumbled upon an online forum where discussions about cryptocurrency and stock trading were taking place. People were making fortunes, sometimes overnight. At first, he thought it was just another scam, but after weeks of research and careful calculations, he realized that there was a legitimate opportunity for those who knew how to play the game. He started small, investing what little savings he had into stocks and cryptocurrencies. It wasn't much, but it was enough to dip his toes into the water. To his surprise, he started seeing results. His investments grew, albeit slowly, but the returns were tangible. Slowly, he became more adept, his confidence growing as his portfolio expanded. Every night, he studied financial trends, learning to predict market movements. He wasn't a natural-born investor, but his dedication and willingness to learn allowed him to make calculated decisions that paid off. Months passed and Cao Yi's small investments turned into a modest fortune. He began using his growing wealth to expand into new ventures, buying and selling digital assets, investing in startup businesses, and exploring industries that had once seemed out of reach. His quiet ambition was starting to show results. What had once been a few hundred yuan was now several thousand. And with each success, his mind turned to the next step. He was no longer the man who worked for He, he was becoming someone who could create his own empire. One afternoon, while reviewing his latest investments, Cao Yi received an email that caught his attention. A luxury real estate opportunity in a nearby city was up for grabs. The property was underpriced due to previous mismanagement, but with the right investment, it could be turned into a profitable project. His instincts told him this was the kind of venture he needed. It was risky, yes, but so was everything else in his life. If he wanted to make a real impact, he needed to push forward, to seize opportunities without fear of failure. He reached out to a contact from an investment group he had been building relationships with. They agreed to partner with him, pooling their resources to buy the property and develop it. For the first time in his life, Cao Yi felt the power of being in control. No longer was he at the mercy of He or anyone else. He had become the one calling the shots. The transformation was not immediate, but it was palpable. Cao Yi was no longer just a worker in the factory, he was becoming a businessman. And with his growing wealth, he began to realize that revenge against He might not be a matter of just taking back what he had lost. It could be about something far more significant, controlling the very industry that had once crushed him. One day, while inspecting the new real estate project, Cao Yi received a call from an old acquaintance, Liang Wei, who worked in the manufacturing industry. Liang Wei mentioned that he had heard about the struggles at the He factory. He had been failing to manage his operations efficiently. Cao Yi's pulse quickened. This was it. The cracks were beginning to show in He's empire. But Cao Yi wasn't ready to strike just yet. He had learned patience through his investments. The time would come when He would be vulnerable and Cao Yi would be there, waiting to seize control. For now, he would continue building his wealth and influence, piece by piece, step by step. As he sat in the office of his new investment venture, looking over blueprints for the property, a thought crossed his mind. He was no longer just trying to escape. He was building the foundation for something far bigger than his revenge. He was building an empire. The factory floor buzzed with the sound of machinery, but Cao Yi's mind was far away from the metal presses and the clang of steel. His thoughts were occupied by Xiaowen, the woman who had captivated him for as long as he could remember. She wasn't like the others who worked in the factory. She was beautiful, confident, and carried herself with an elegance that Cao Yi had always admired from a distance. At first, their relationship had been purely professional. Xiaowen worked as an administrative assistant for He and his business ventures. She often spent long hours in the office, managing He's calendar, organizing meetings, and handling delicate matters that required a level of discretion. Cao Yi, as a lowly worker, had little reason to interact with her beyond the occasional pleasantries in passing. But over time, Xiaowen began to notice him. She saw past the rough exterior, the grime of factory work that clung to his clothes, and recognized something in him, something beyond his station. And in turn, Cao Yi had been drawn to her warmth, her kindness, and her fierce determination to break free from the limitations of her own world. It was during a late-night shift at the factory that their first real conversation took place. Cao Yi had been working late, assembling parts for an urgent order, when Xiaowen had entered the factory to retrieve some documents. He noticed her immediately, her silhouette framed by the harsh factory lights, her steps graceful even amidst the chaos of machinery. "Working late?" she asked, her voice soft but confident. "I could say the same about you," Cao Yi replied with a slight smile. He hadn't expected her to be in the factory at this hour. They were both alone, separated from the rest of the workers, and for a brief moment the factory felt less oppressive. As they talked, their bond grew. Xiaowen shared her frustrations with the stifling environment of the factory, the limitations placed on her because of her family's legacy and her father's expectations. Cao Yi shared his dreams of escaping the factory life, and for the first time he found someone who seemed to understand him. Someone who wasn't just interested in his lowly status but in his aspirations. Their connection deepened quickly. Xiaowen, who had always felt trapped by her family's demands, found herself drawn to Cao Yi's raw ambition. His determination was contagious. Yet she couldn't ignore the reality of her situation. Her father, a powerful man in his own right, had already arranged for her to marry Jiang Liqiang, a wealthy businessman with connections and influence. Jiang Liqiang was everything her father had ever wanted for her, a man of status, wealth, and power. But Xiaowen had never loved him. Jiang Liqiang, aware of the growing tension between Cao Yi and Xiaowen, decided to take matters into his own hands. One evening, after a lavish business dinner, he cornered Xiaowen in a secluded area of the restaurant, his tone low and persuasive. "You know you can't stay with him," Jiang Liqiang said, his eyes cold but laced with a possessive edge. He's just a worker in a factory. What future does he have? You're meant for someone with power, someone like me. Xiaowen stiffened, trying to remain calm. I don't want to marry you, Jiang. I never have. Her voice was steady, but the inner conflict was evident in her eyes. This isn't what I want. Jiang Liqiang smiled, his eyes gleaming with arrogance. You think you have a choice? This marriage is a business deal, and whether you like it or not, you'll fulfill your role. It was in that moment that Xiaowen realized just how little control she had over her life. Despite her growing feelings for Cao Yi, she was bound by her family's expectations, by the promises made in her name. But she also knew deep down that her heart didn't belong to Jiang Liqiang. It had never truly belonged to him. It was Cao Yi who had captured her heart, the man who dared to dream beyond his station, who had the courage to fight for a future that was his own. The next day she met Cao Yi at a quiet cafe, her heart heavy with the weight of the decisions before her. Cao Yi, she began, her voice trembling, I don't know what to do anymore. Jiang is pressing me to marry him and my father expects it. But I want more. I want to be with you, but I can't lose everything. Cao Yi looked at her, his expression filled with understanding, but also with a quiet resolve. I can't tell you what to do, Xiaowen. You have to make your own choices. But I want you to know that I'll fight for you. If you choose me, I'll be there. Her heart raced as she looked into his eyes. In that moment, Xiaowen knew that Cao Yi wasn't just fighting for himself, he was fighting for them, for a future they could have together. But the reality of her situation loomed over them both. The love triangle between Cao Yi, Xiaowen, and Jiang Liqiang was just beginning to unfold, and with it, the stakes of their future. Xiaowen's heart was torn, caught between the pull of passion and the weight of duty. Her love for Cao Yi was undeniable, but was it enough to defy her family's wishes? Would Cao Yi's ambition be enough to overcome the obstacles that lay ahead? And as Cao Yi stood on the precipice of his rise to power, he knew that the decisions they made now would shape not only their futures but the future of their entire world. Cao Yi sat in his small office, the glow of his computer screen illuminating his face. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, eyes scanning financial reports and investment portfolios. What had once been a distant dream was now becoming reality. Cao Yi was no longer just a worker at the factory. He had grown into something much more dangerous, an investor with a purpose, a strategist who knew how to bend the system to his will. His latest venture was a high-stakes investment in a real estate project that was now showing significant returns. He had learned to read the market like an open book. But his ambitions were no longer confined to the world of real estate. Cao Yi had moved into stocks, cryptocurrency, and even venture capital, quietly accumulating wealth and influence. Every move was calculated, every investment carefully chosen. His growing portfolio was starting to turn heads in the business world. Cao Yi had made enough in profits to be invited into private meetings with some of the wealthiest players in the city. His reputation had spread, and he was no longer dismissed as just another factory worker. He was now seen as someone who could make things happen, someone whose investments were not to be underestimated. But as much as Cao Yi was focused on his financial growth, his thoughts remained on He Jin and the factory that had once been his prison. He knew that He Jin's empire was crumbling. The factory was struggling under mismanagement, with delays and quality control issues threatening its very survival. Cao Yi saw an opportunity. He Jin had grown complacent, his business practices outdated and inefficient. Cao Yi had no illusions. He Jin was a man driven by power and greed, and he'd made enemies along the way. It was only a matter of time before the factory would collapse under its own. Wait. But that didn't mean Cao Yi would wait for it to fail naturally. No, he had bigger plans. Through his network of contacts, Cao Yi began to quietly sow the seeds of destruction within He Jin's operations. He started buying up shares in the factory's suppliers, gaining control over the flow of materials. He fed information to competitors, leaking details about the factory's weaknesses. In the business world, information was as valuable as money, and Cao Yi knew how to use it to his advantage. His first major move came when he learned that He Jin's factory was struggling to meet deadlines for a large contract with a government agency. Cao Yi saw this as the perfect opportunity to strike. With the connections he had in the manufacturing world, he worked out a deal with a rival factory to offer the same services, faster and at a more competitive price. Within weeks, He Jin's contract was stolen out from under him, and his factory lost the deal. It was a small victory in the grand scheme of things, but it sent a powerful message. Cao Yi was no longer a nobody. He was a force to be reckoned with. As the weeks passed, Cao Yi's manipulations became more aggressive. He began purchasing significant portions of the He family's stock in the factory, quietly gaining power. His next step was to organize a hostile takeover, an ambitious plan to push He Jin out entirely. But he needed more leverage, more control. Cao Yi knew that if he wanted to bring He Jin down, he would have to strike at his most vulnerable points. Late one evening, after reviewing his latest market moves, Cao Yi received a call from Liang Wei, a businessman who had been one of his early investors. Liang's voice was urgent on the other end of the line. "Cao Yi, we've got a problem. The factory's falling apart and He Jin is becoming desperate. He's about to make a deal with Jiang Liqiang to bail him out. If that happens, you can kiss your plans goodbye." Cao Yi sat back in his chair, the weight of Liang's words sinking in. Jiang Liqiang, the same man who had been trying to undermine him romantically and professionally, was now entering the picture again, threatening to undermine his carefully laid plans. "Then I'll make sure it doesn't happen," Cao Yi said coolly. "We can't afford to let him get involved. It's time to push him out." The plan had already started to take shape. Cao Yi contacted his allies within the stock market and the business world, ensuring that Jiang Liqiang's attempts to support He Jin's factory would be met with resistance. He used his network of contacts to leverage pressure on Liang Wei's business partners, setting up a series of legal challenges and public relations campaigns designed to create doubt about Jiang Liqiang's involvement in the deal. He Jin might be the puppet master, but Cao Yi was now the one pulling the strings. The takeover was almost in his grasp. By the time Jiang Liqiang and He Jin realized what had happened, it would be too late. Cao Yi had made sure that his rise was unstoppable, and that his plan would succeed, no matter who stood in his way. As he looked over his investment portfolio one last time that night, Cao Yi felt a rush of excitement. The pieces were falling into place. He had no intention of staying in the shadows any longer. It was time to move from being a player in the game to the one who controlled it. The tension between Cao Yi and He Jin had been simmering for months, but now, it was ready to erupt. Cao Yi had spent years working his way up from the depths of the factory's basement, silently observing He Jin's every move. Now the tables had turned. Cao Yi was in control, and He Jin, the man who had once dismissed him as nothing more than an expendable worker, was on the verge of losing everything. It all began when Cao Yi called He Jin to a meeting. The invitation had been delivered through a trusted contact in He Jin's circle, and the location was chosen carefully, an upscale business hotel in the city center, a place that screamed power and authority. The stage was set for a confrontation that would define both of their futures. He Jin arrived, his presence as commanding as ever. He wore a tailored suit, his face as cold and calculating as it had always been. But something was different today. He looked tense, his eyes darting around the room as if he were looking for a way out. Cao Yi, on the other hand, sat calmly at the table, a slight smirk playing at the corners of his lips as he observed He Jin's every move. He Jin had walked into the lion's den and Cao Yi was ready to strike. "I'm surprised you asked to meet with me, Cao Yi," He Jin said, his voice dripping with condescension. "What could someone like you want from me?" Cao Yi's eyes narrowed, but he remained composed. "I'm not here to beg for your approval, He Jin. I'm here to offer you a choice." He paused for a moment, letting the words sink in before continuing. "You've had your time at the top. But now things are changing. I'm taking control of the factory. And you, well, you'll either adapt or you'll be left behind." He Jin's expression darkened. "Is this some kind of joke? Do you really think you can take over my business just like that?" His voice was rising now, but Cao Yi could hear the underlying uncertainty. "You're a fool if you think I'll just hand over everything I've worked for." Cao Yi stood up slowly, his calm demeanor never wavering. He walked toward the window, his back to He Jin, before turning to face him again. "This isn't about handing anything over, He Jin. It's about survival. Your factory is failing and you're too blind to see it. I've been watching you, observing your every move. Your mismanagement, your refusal to adapt to the changing business landscape, it's all catching up to you." "You're wrong," He Jin spat, his hands clenched into fists. "I built this empire. I made it what it is. I'm not going anywhere." Cao Yi took a step forward, his voice low and measured. "You built it on a foundation of arrogance and greed, He Jin. You've made enemies at every turn and now they're closing in on you. I've already started taking action. I've already made moves to dismantle your empire." The words hit He Jin like a slap in the face. His eyes widened, and for the first time in their conversation, Cao Yi saw genuine fear flicker in He Jin's eyes. You've been plotting against me?" He Jin's voice shook with anger but also something else, something deeper, more vulnerable. You think you can just walk in here and take over? Cao Yi didn't answer. He didn't need to. The evidence was already on the table. He had already set the wheels in motion. The competitors were circling, and his business partners were ready to take the plunge. He had lost control, and Cao Yi was the one who held the key to the future of the factory. I've been waiting for this moment for a long time, Cao Yi said, his voice growing colder. You should have seen this coming. You should have seen me coming. But now it's too late. The factory belongs to me now. And you, well, you're just a stepping stone in my path. He-Jin's face contorted with rage, but Cao Yi could see the desperation behind his eyes. You're nothing. You always have been. You think you're better than me? You think you've won? I'll crush you just like I've crushed everyone else who tried to stand in my way. But the words rang hollow. The confidence He-Jin had once exuded was gone. Cao Yi had stripped him of it, piece by piece, with every calculated move. And now, as He-Jin stood there, trembling with fury and fear, Cao Yi knew he had won. The battle was over before it had even truly begun. Get out of my sight, He-Jin hissed, his voice barely above a whisper. Cao Yi didn't need to say anything more. He turned and walked out of the room, leaving He-Jin alone in his downfall. As he stepped into the elevator, the weight of the moment settled in. He had taken the first step towards his ultimate goal. Not just revenge, but domination. He had outsmarted He-Jin, and now he was poised to take control of everything. And there was no turning back now. The victory against He-Jin had been swift, but Cao Yi knew better than to celebrate too early. The real battle was just beginning. He-Jin might have been the face of the factory for years, but there were many who still held loyalty to him, or perhaps more accurately held fear of him. Now, as Cao Yi walked through the factory halls, the weight of his new position began to settle in. He was no longer a worker. He was the factory's owner, its CEO. And while this brought him a sense of power, it also brought immense responsibility. The factory floor was bustling as usual, but the atmosphere was different. Employees whispered behind closed doors, casting furtive glances at the man who had just toppled their former leader. Cao Yi had to prove that he was more than just a replacement for He-Jin. He had to earn their respect. Walking through the rows of machinery, Cao Yi was approached by Liang Wei, one of the few investors who had supported him early on. Liang Wei had been instrumental in helping Cao Yi gather the necessary funds to buy He-Jin's shares, but now he was becoming a little too eager to claim his part in the factory's new direction. Cao Yi, this is a great opportunity, but you have to keep the momentum going, Liang Wei said, his voice heavy with anticipation. We've already begun to see some changes in the operations, but we need more. The employees are still skeptical, and your competitors are circling like vultures. You need to show them that you're in control. Cao Yi nodded, understanding the gravity of Liang's words. I know, he replied. I'm working on it. We need to tighten up operations, streamline production, and get these employees on my side. I'll deal with the rivals later. Liang gave him a knowing look. Don't take too long. Jiang Liqiang isn't the kind of man to let a little setback like He-Jin's loss stop him. He's already making moves behind the scenes. Jiang Liqiang. The name sent a cold shiver down Cao Yi's spine. Jiang Liqiang had always seen Cao Yi as an obstacle, first in the business world, then in his pursuit of Xiaowen. Now Cao Yi knew that Jiang would be gunning for him, looking to pull strings from the shadows to destabilize him. The reality of leadership hit Cao Yi with a wave of pressure. He had to act quickly. If he was going to keep control of the factory, he needed to secure loyalty within. He began by meeting with key department heads, those who had been loyal to He-Jin and those who had shown potential for growth. These meetings were about one thing: consolidating his power. In a private meeting with Zhang Jun, the head of production, Cao Yi made his intentions clear. Zhang Jun had worked under He-Jin for years, and his knowledge of the factory's operations made him invaluable. But Cao Yi needed to ensure Zhang was on his side. You've been with He-Jin for a long time, Zhang Jun, Cao Yi began, his tone steady. But now the landscape is changing. You know as well as I do that this factory isn't going to survive if we don't adapt. I'm here to make sure we move forward, not backwards. Zhang Jun eyed him carefully, his face unreadable. And what does that mean for me, Cao Yi? He asked, voice cautious. Cao Yi leaned forward, his gaze unwavering. It means that you'll have the chance to lead this factory into the future. I'm not here to replace you, I'm here to work with you. But I need to know that I can trust you. Zhang Jun's silence spoke volumes. After what felt like an eternity, he nodded slowly. I'll support you, Cao Yi. You've shown me that you're not the same as He-Jin. You actually understand the business. I'll help you make this work. With Zhang Jun's support secured, Cao Yi moved to his next task, eliminating the competition. He knew that Jiang Liqiang wasn't going to simply accept his loss. Jiang had power, resources, and connections, things that Cao Yi didn't yet fully control. But Cao Yi wasn't going to play fair. He had learned how to manipulate markets, control assets, and leverage every weakness. One afternoon, Cao Yi received an unexpected visit. Jiang Liqiang, accompanied by several of his associates, walked into his office without warning, exuding confidence, but also an unmistakable air of menace. Cao Yi, Jiang Liqiang greeted him with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I think it's time we have a little chat. You've made quite a stir by taking over the factory. But let's make one thing clear. You might have won this round, but you're still a long way from being in charge. Cao Yi sat back in his chair, unfazed. I don't need your approval, Jiang. This factory is mine now. If you're here to negotiate, I'm not interested. Jiang Liqiang laughed, a sharp, cruel sound. You think you're safe? You think you're untouchable? He leaned forward, his voice lowering. I control more than you realize, Cao Yi. And trust me, I'm not going to let a little upstart like you take what's mine. Consider this a warning. Then consider this my answer. Cao Yi stood up, his eyes locking with Jiang's. The game has changed, Jiang. You're either going to get on board, or you'll be left behind. Don't make the mistake of underestimating me. With that, Jiang Liqiang left, his face twisted with frustration. But Cao Yi knew that this was only the beginning. Jiang wouldn't stop. But neither would Cao Yi. He was ready for the war that was about to begin, the battle for the future of the factory and for control of the empire that was slowly beginning to take shape. Cao Yi sat at his desk, reviewing the latest round of financial reports. His fingers tapped rhythmically against the wood, a subtle reflection of the tension that had settled in his mind. The factory was now firmly in his hands, but the battle was far from over. Jiang Liqiang was not the type to admit defeat quietly. Cao Yi could feel the weight of the upcoming war, a war that wouldn't be fought just in boardrooms or behind closed doors but in the streets, in the public eye, and, most dangerously, in Xiaowen's heart. Jiang Liqiang had made his intentions clear. He wasn't going to let Cao Yi take over without a fight. The next few weeks were filled with strategic moves from both sides. Cao Yi's grip on the factory was secure for now, but Jiang Liqiang's retaliation had begun in the form of underhanded business tactics and manipulative strategies aimed at sowing doubt among Cao Yi's allies. Cao Yi first became aware of Jiang's campaign when he received a call from Liang Wei, his most trusted investor. Cao Yi, we have a problem, Liang Wei said, his voice strained. I've been getting calls from the board members. They're talking about pulling out. They're worried about the instability. What instability? Cao Yi replied, his calm demeanor masking the growing concern. I've been in control of this factory for months. No. The operations are running smoothly. That's the issue, Liang Wei explained. Jiang Liqiang is pulling strings behind the scenes. He's using his influence over the board to create doubt. He's been spreading rumors about mismanagement, suggesting that your rise to power was too fast, too sudden. Cao Yi's jaw clenched as he sat back in his chair, the weight of the situation settling on his shoulders. He's trying to discredit me, he muttered. And I won't let him get away with it. The following days were filled with back-to-back meetings, each one more tense than the last. Cao Yi had to ensure that every department ran smoothly, all while keeping an eye on Jiang Liqiang's manipulations. He knew he had to act fast and decisively to maintain his hold over the factory and his investors. He started by making moves to counter the rumors Jiang had spread. Cao Yi met with several key board members, using his strategic mind to win them over. He presented a detailed growth plan, highlighting the factory's recent successes and promising more profitable ventures. The meetings were intense, but Cao Yi's confidence and meticulous planning began to shift the mood in his favor. The investors began to realize that Cao Yi was not the impulsive, inexperienced man Jiang had painted him to be. He had a clear vision for the future, and they could see that he was determined to make it happen. But even as the board members slowly began to side with him, Jiang Liqiang was relentless. He had a vast network at his disposal, and he began to put more pressure on the people in Cao Yi's life, starting with Xiaowen. Jiang knew that Xiaowen was the key to Cao Yi's personal and professional success. He had already lost her once to Cao Yi, and he was not willing to accept that. As the pressure mounted, Jiang began to use their past relationship to his advantage, subtly manipulating Xiaowen into questioning her loyalty to Cao Yi. He started sending her expensive gifts, arranging business meetings where they could spend time together, and reminding her of the life they could have if she returned to him. Cao Yi could see through Jiang's tactics. He knew that Jiang would stop at nothing to win back Xiaowen and break his hold on her. But Cao Yi wasn't going to give up without a fight. He had already lost too much to let Jiang Liqiang take what he had built. One night, after a particularly tense meeting with the board, Cao Yi made his way to the apartment he shared with Xiaowen. His thoughts were clouded with frustration and determination. He had to act fast to shut down Jiang's attempts to undermine him, and he knew that if Xiaowen was swayed by Jiang's charm and manipulation, everything he had worked for would collapse. When he arrived at their apartment, he found Xiaowen sitting on the couch, her eyes downcast. Cao Yi could tell that something was weighing on her. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice soft but tinged with concern. Xiaowen hesitated before looking up at him. "I saw Jiang today," she said quietly. "He's been talking to me, trying to remind me of the past. He wants me back, Cao Yi." Cao Yi felt a stab of jealousy and frustration, but he forced himself to stay calm. "I know what he's doing. He's trying to use you to break me." Xiaowen stood up, her expression conflicted. "I'm not sure what to do anymore. I've always known Jiang, and I thought I was done with him, but now I'm starting to question everything." Cao Yi stepped closer to her, taking her hands in his. "I'm not asking you to choose between us. I'm asking you to choose what's best for you. Jiang Liqiang can offer you security, but he will never love you the way I do. I won't force you to stay with me, but I want you to understand that I'm not here to play games. I'm here to build something real." The words hung in the air between them. Xiaowen looked at him for a long moment, the weight of her decision heavy in her heart. Outside, the city's lights twinkled, but within the apartment, the air felt thick with unspoken tension. The rivalry between Cao Yi and Jiang Liqiang wasn't just about business anymore. It had become personal. And in the end, it would be Xiaowen's decision that would tip the scales. Cao Yi sat in his office late one evening, staring at the stack of papers before him. His mind raced as the sounds of the factory buzzed quietly in the background, a constant reminder of the empire he had worked so hard to build. But today the weight of his decisions felt heavier than ever. The growing tension with Jiang Liqiang seemed to be closing in, and his relationship with Xiaowen was becoming more strained. His phone buzzed with a notification from Liang Wei, a name he had come to rely on for support and guidance. "We need to talk," the message read. "It's urgent." Cao Yi's heart sank as he read the message. He had already heard whispers around the factory that something was off, rumors that something was shifting beneath the surface. He couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. "Liang, what's going on?" he texted back, his fingers hovering over the screen. Minutes later, Liang called him directly. "Cao Yi," Liang said, his voice tense. "I need to be upfront with you. I don't know how to say this, but I think you've been set up." Cao Yi's pulse quickened. "What do you mean? Set up? By who?" Liang paused before responding, his tone laden with uncertainty. "It's Xiaowen. She's been working with Jiang Liqiang." The words hit Cao Yi like a thunderclap. His mind raced, trying to piece together what Liang had just told him. Xiaowen, the woman he had trusted more than anyone, had been involved with Jiang Liqiang? Was this a misunderstanding? Was it possible that there was some other explanation? "No," Cao Yi muttered to himself, shaking his head as if trying to dispel the thought. She wouldn't do that. But deep down he knew that something was wrong. Xiaowen had been distant lately, her words becoming colder, her actions more unpredictable. She had been spending time with Jiang Liqiang, and though Cao Yi had tried to convince himself that it was nothing, the pieces were falling into place. "I saw them together, Cao Yi. And I've heard enough from other people in the factory to know that she's been feeding Jiang information. She's working with him to undermine you. It's not just business, this is personal." The pain that pierced through Cao Yi's chest was almost unbearable. The person he had fought for, the one he had trusted, had betrayed him. Xiaowen had gone to Jiang Liqiang, the one person Cao Yi had been trying to defeat, and now she was playing a part in his downfall. Cao Yi's voice was low, filled with a quiet fury. "How could she do this?" He gritted his teeth. "She knew what I was building. She knew what it meant to me." Liang hesitated again. "I don't have all the details, but I've been hearing rumors that Jiang is planning to take full control of the factory. And now that Xiaowen's involved, it's clear she's been feeding him information about your moves. She's been sabotaging you from the inside." The weight of Liang's words crushed him. For the first time, Cao Yi felt helpless. He had lost everything. Xiaowen, the one person he had been fighting for, had sided with his greatest enemy. The betrayal wasn't just about business, it was about love, trust, and everything that had driven him up until now. "I'll take care of this," Cao Yi finally said, his voice ice cold. "Thank you, Liang." Hanging up the phone, he leaned back in his chair, staring out the window. The city lights below flickered, mirroring the storm that had formed inside him. He had been so focused on defeating Jiang Liqiang that he hadn't considered that his biggest threat might come from within his own camp. His trust in Xiaowen had been his blind spot. He stood up abruptly and left the office, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts. He needed to see Xiaowen. He needed to hear it from her, to confront her face to face. When he arrived at Xiaowen's apartment later that night, he found her sitting on the couch, just as she had been the night he had confided in her about his plans for the future. But now everything had changed. The warmth he had once seen in her eyes was gone, replaced by an unreadable expression. "Cao Yi," Xiaowen said softly, her voice lacking its usual warmth. "I've been waiting for you." Cao Yi's gaze hardened. "You've been waiting? Waiting for what? To betray me? To help Jiang Liqiang take everything I've built?" Her eyes flickered with guilt, but she didn't answer immediately. "I never wanted to hurt you," she said, her voice wavering slightly. "I thought I was doing the right thing, for both of us." "The right thing?" Cao Yi repeated, his voice rising with anger. "How could you betray me like this? I fought for you, I gave up everything for you, and this is what you do? You side with the man who wants to destroy me?" Xiaowen stood up slowly, her eyes now full of tears. "I never wanted to hurt you. But I've been caught between two worlds, Cao Yi. You don't understand how much pressure I've been under. Jiang Liqiang, he offered me something I've been missing." Cao Yi's fists clenched, his heart sinking further. "And that was enough for you to betray me? To destroy everything I've worked for?" There was silence for a moment before Xiaowen finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry, Cao Yi. I'm sorry, but I can't keep living in this world. I need something different." The words cut through him like a knife. He had never felt such betrayal, and yet he couldn't help but feel a sense of emptiness wash over him. Xiaowen had chosen Jiang Liqiang, and that choice would change everything. With a final heart-wrenching look, Cao Yi turned and walked out of the apartment, leaving Xiaowen behind. He had lost her, and in doing so he had lost a part of himself. But this was war. And in war there was no room for weakness, no time for regrets. The battle for the factory, and for revenge, had just become personal. The days following Xiaowen's betrayal felt like an eternity to Cao Yi. His mind was consumed with thoughts of vengeance, but he knew better than to let his emotions dictate his next move. His heart ached, but he couldn't afford to show weakness. The factory, the empire he was building, was at stake, and Jiang Liqiang was no longer just a business rival. He was a personal adversary, a man who had taken not only Cao Yi's legacy but also the one thing Cao Yi had cherished most, Xiaowen. Standing in his office, Cao Yi looked out over the factory floor. The machinery was still running, the employees still worked tirelessly, but the undercurrent of tension was palpable. There were those who still whispered about the changes he had implemented, some who feared him, and others who were loyal to He Jin, waiting for an opportunity to undermine him. But there were also those who saw his potential, who believed in his vision. And it was those people he needed to rally if he was going to come out on top. The factory was more than just a business to Cao Yi, it was a symbol of everything he had fought for. It was a place where he had struggled, learned, and finally risen above the oppressive forces that had held him down for so long. He wasn't going to let Jiang Liqiang take it from him. He Jin might have been a tyrant, but Jiang Liqiang was a predator. And in the game they were playing, only the strongest survived. Cao Yi's thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. "Come in," he called, straightening up from his desk. The door opened and Liang Wei walked in, a serious expression on his face. He had been one of Cao Yi's most reliable allies, and Cao Yi knew he could trust him now more than ever. Liang Wei had seen the potential in Cao Yi long before he had become the factory's leader. "Cao Yi, we have to talk," Liang Wei said, closing the door behind him. "It's about Jiang Liqiang." Cao Yi's gaze hardened, his hand tightening on the edge of his desk. "I know. He's made his move, and now I'm going to make mine." Liang Wei raised an eyebrow. "You're not going to let him walk all over you, are you?" Cao Yi's lips curled into a cold smile. "He's already underestimated me. Now I'll show him what I'm capable of." Liang Wei studied him for a moment before speaking again. "Jiang's been pressuring the board, trying to turn them against you. He's already started getting his people into key positions in the company. But there's one thing he hasn't counted on, your ability to fight back." Cao Yi nodded, his mind working at full speed. "We need to be strategic. We can't just go in blind. I've made some moves of my own." He reached for a folder on his desk and handed it to Liang Wei. "I've already set up a meeting with Jiang Liqiang's main competitors. They've been waiting for a change in leadership, and now that He is out of the picture, they see the opportunity to take the market by storm. Liang Wei opened the folder, scanning the papers quickly. These are solid moves. But don't forget, Jiang still got leverage in other parts of the market. He's not going to go down without a fight. I'm not expecting him to. But I'm done playing nice. This is war now, Cao Yi replied, his voice unwavering. And I intend to win. As Cao Yi laid out his plans, the reality of the situation began to set in. The factory was in danger, but it wasn't just about business. This was personal. Xiaowen's betrayal had shaken him to the core, but it had also hardened him. He had lost what mattered most, and now there was nothing left to lose. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of meetings, strategic moves, and tense confrontations. Cao Yi focused on strengthening his alliances within the company, ensuring that his loyalists were in key positions to maintain control. He also began to reach out to other business leaders, seeking their support and offering them stakes in his vision. If Jiang Liqiang wanted to destroy him, Cao Yi would give him a fight he would never forget. Meanwhile, Jiang Liqiang continued his campaign to weaken Cao Yi's position, but he had underestimated the resilience of his rival. Cao Yi had learned from every setback, every defeat, and he had built his strength on the foundation of those lessons. This was a battle not just for control of the factory, but for the future of his empire. Late one night, after a particularly intense meeting with the board, Cao Yi stood alone in his office, staring at the city skyline. He had won the battle for the factory, but the war was far from over. Jiang Liqiang would come at him with everything he had, but Cao Yi was ready. I'll make him pay, Cao Yi whispered to himself, his voice full of resolve. I'll make them all pay. With a fierce determination, he turned away from the window and walked out of the office. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Cao Yi was no longer the man who had once been a lowly factory worker. He was a leader, a fighter, and he was ready to claim his place at the top. The factory had become a battlefield. Every corner, every hallway, every office, and every meeting room seemed to hum with tension. Cao Yi could feel it in the air, as if the walls themselves were closing in. His power, once uncertain and fragile, was now fortified by a series of calculated moves. But so was Jiang Liqiang's. And the time had come to face each other head-on. The board meetings had grown more intense, each one a game of cat and mouse. Every move Cao Yi made was mirrored by Jiang's counter-move. His rival's presence loomed over him, both in the physical space of the factory and in the labyrinth of business strategy. But Cao Yi had come to a realization. This was not just a power struggle. It was a war of wills. And he wasn't about to lose. His phone buzzed with a message from Liang Wei, his most trusted ally. Tomorrow morning. The board vote. This is the final step. Jiang's making his move. Cao Yi's jaw clenched as he read the message. Tomorrow. Everything would be decided tomorrow. There was no more room for mistakes. The next morning, the factory's boardroom felt colder than usual. Cao Yi stood at the head of the table, the room filled with the key figures who would decide his fate. The tension was palpable, the air thick with the weight of the decision they were about to make. Jiang Liqiang was sitting at the far end of the room, his cold eyes never leaving Cao Yi. His presence seemed to dominate the space, as if he owned the very air they were breathing. Cao Yi, the chairman of the board said, breaking the silence. We've all seen the progress that's been made under your leadership. But there are still concerns. Jiang Liqiang has brought forward some very compelling points. Cao Yi's gaze sharpened, and he could feel the challenge in the chairman's words. This was it. The moment he had prepared for. This wasn't just a business decision. This was the battle for his empire. I understand the concerns, Cao Yi said, his voice calm but filled with authority. But what you need to understand is that I am not just a businessman, I am a leader. This factory needs someone who can move it forward, who can take risks and make bold decisions. I am that leader. Jiang Liqiang may have experience, but he doesn't have vision. And without vision we will never succeed. There was a pause in the room as everyone processed his words. Jiang Liqiang, however, was unfazed. He leaned back in his chair, his smile never faltering. You're delusional, Cao Yi, Jiang said, his voice smooth and dripping with disdain. You think you can take on the entire industry by yourself? You can't even manage your own factory without my help. Cao Yi's heart raced, but he held his ground. You've never understood what it takes to lead. You think this is about managing a factory, but it's not. It's about managing people, about inspiring loyalty, about forging alliances that last. You spent your life making enemies, Jiang. I've spent mine making allies. Jiang's smile faltered for a brief second, but he quickly regained his composure. We'll see about that, he muttered before turning to the board members. I've given you all the facts. I've shown you the numbers, the strategy. Cao Yi is untested, and his vision is nothing more than a pipe dream. As the board members murmured among themselves, Cao Yi felt the tide shift. He had expected this kind of attack. He knew Jiang would play dirty, would manipulate the facts and twist the truth to suit his narrative. But what Jiang hadn't counted on was the loyalty Cao Yi had earned from those who truly mattered. The employees, the people who worked day in and day out to make the factory run smoothly. Liang Wei entered the room at that moment, his presence commanding attention. He stepped forward, holding a thick envelope in his hands. I think it's time to show you the truth, Jiang, Liang said, his voice carrying across the room. Cao Yi has not only secured the factory's future, he's secured the support of those who make it run. I've brought the signed petitions from the factory's top managers. Every single one of them supports his vision. The envelope was passed around, and as the board members scanned the petitions, Jiang's face grew dark with frustration. This is nonsense, he growled, but the board was already whispering among themselves, some nodding in agreement with Liang's words. The vote came soon after. Each board member was asked to cast their ballot, and the tension in the room was unbearable. Cao Yi stood tall, his heart pounding as he awaited the results. Finally, the chairman stood up with a solemn expression. The vote is in, he said. Cao Yi has secured the majority. He will remain the CEO of this factory. The room erupted into murmurs, but Cao Yi didn't allow himself to show any emotion. He had won for now. But Jiang Liqiang was not a man to be taken lightly. This battle was far from over. As Jiang rose to leave, he shot Cao Yi a final, venomous glance. You may have won this round, Cao Yi. But I promise you this isn't over. I will make sure you regret this decision. Cao Yi watched him leave, his hands clenched into fists. Let him come, he muttered under his breath. I'll be ready.